I'm pleased to be joined by Bruce de Torres. He is a Renaissance man. He is everywhere, and I really want to talk to him because I think he has a lot of insights that he needs to share with us. So, Bruce, thanks for being with me.
Thank you for having me, James. How are you today?
Good, thank you. We're recording this the day after the 23rd anniversary of 9/11. And obviously, you're the author of God's School, 9/11 and JFK. We'll talk about that book as we go through it, but it seems to me that was a seminal event for you personally. Would that be accurate to say?
In many ways, in many
Okay.
ways.
Walk us
Uh,
through where were you on 9/11, 2001 then?
I was down in Atlanta, Georgia, where I had lived for many, many years, and I was in a Starbucks. I remember standing at the counter. It was probably around 9:45 when somebody next to me, stranger, he told me like, "This is what's going on." So I remember vividly where I was. Yeah,
Where were you ideologically at that point?
great question. Uh, kind of neutral. Kind of neutral. I I always followed current events. I think I lean more Republican than Democrat. I remember being kind of still on a high of the economy doing well and feeling like, but kind of grossed out by Bill Clinton. And this was still the first year of W's administration. And I was kind of still impressed with those folks from my admiration of how it seemed, according to my mainstream head back then, of how his father, Bush, conducted, that first Gulf War, but kind of just thinking like, oh, everything's okay.
Was there a moment of radicalization that we can maybe call it that you think, yes, this is where things turned for me?
Oh, absolutely. It was the summer of 2004, and somebody I had just met over a 3 or 4 day business thing out in California who was very impressive. He said 9/11, the official story is nonsense. You really have to look into it. He may have gone so far as to say an inside job. And James, I've been down the rabbit hole ever since, just consumed with studying and researching these things to the very day till right now.
Do you know whatever happened to that guy who told you that?
No, and I've been meaning to track him down.
Yeah.
He was a most interesting fellow. And it behooves me to get online and track him down. I would be fascinated because he was intriguing and fascinating at the same time.
So you were going down this rabbit hole in tandem with Iraq, essentially as being in that news every day. Uh, how did you come to how did you come to distrust then the mainstream? I think we can say there was a distrust in the mainstream with your work. I don't want to generalize or I don't want to speak for you, but
Oh, yeah, yeah.
is that kind of how so you're going down this rabbit hole, you're seeing what's being put out in the mainstream news and what's going on with you in your mind at that point?
I was getting outraged. It took me a year to reach this point where I stood up and said, "You mean there's really a dragon to slay?" I was with like-minded fellows and people, and I studied it every spare moment in addition to trying to earn a living. And wonderfully, every Wednesday night, I was already in the habit of going to this little dive bar, James, that had open mic night. And often I would bring my guitar, and I had written a few songs, and I really liked these very relaxed old codgers in this divey bar. It was just such an escape from reality. However, they also let spoken word. You could have 15 minutes. So from this time forward and for the next many, many years, I got out there, and for 15 minutes, I would teach what I was learning about 9/11 being an inside job. I would teach what I was learning about the Federal Reserve, how that was formed, and how the oligarchs back then had co opted our government, and on and on and on, especially filled and fueled with the books of the late, great Jim Marrs. My favorite titles are The Rise of the Fourth Reich and also Rule by Secrecy. These are wonderfully written, so easily enjoyable, documented, chock full information about the history that exposes so much of our mainstream culture and institutions and politics and media for the clown acts, the lying, dancing lies and phoniness that they are.
You were able to articulate all of this then in your book, God School 9/11 and JFK, which was published 2021. Is that accurate, right, Bruce?
Yes.
You're
Yep.
trying to so, but it seems to me, obviously this is a long time coming.
Yeah. Yeah.
When did you actually start to say, I need to put this down, and and it became a book?
From 2014,
Okay.
because by then I had filled myself also with JFK, his administration, his assassination, and his greatness. And that I was so inflamed with that I conceived the idea for what became my book, wrapped in what I had previously written and put in a drawer about the nature of reality. Everything's made out of energy. Thoughts become things. There's only one of us here. The core bedrock of reality is an internal, eternal, infinite spirit, consciousness, love, God, call it what you will. A classic idea that makes life very livable for bazillions going back centuries. And I thought that's the truth that sets us free, James, is that especially when one studies and discovers the stories of all the thousands of people who've had near death experiences. They come back and assure us this is something of a game, this is something of a school, and this is not reality. This is really like a dream where the goal is to discover loving each other as ourself, as for the antidote of how terrifying it is to be one in competition with many, one against many, one in a hostile universe that will eventually kill us.
Yeah, that you're able to articulate this in an accessible way for those who haven't come across this book yet. I encourage you, God School 9/11 and JFK. It's ambitious and it's all encompassing. But what really struck me about it was that there's a tone that you weave in as the author that really, I mean, for lack of a better word, and this is, if you can expound on this, was a kind of rage or a kind of anger that you were just flat out. I'm going to put that out there in the book, whether through parentheticals or a kind of asides that normally you wouldn't see in books, where the author maybe tries to take more of an omniscient perspective. Was that intentional, or was that just, hey, this is, tell us a little bit about that.
I love that it struck you with that, especially the first thing you kind of said was I weaved that or I wove that through it because we see what we are, James. Meaning, I love that you found that because that's in there. But I've gotten lots of response to the book. It's very dry. It reads like a textbook. So James, there are people who read it who don't get that at all. But the fact that you resonated with that, it makes me very, very happy. Um, and I tried to be very matter of factual. I tried to say something and move on and not over explain. There's 46 pages of sources so that you could see why is he claiming all these things that I've never heard before or that indict trusted public figures as awful criminals. Yes, yes, yes. So I'm glad that you found that in the book.
One of the chapters I mean, I recommend that the whole book. One thing that I really enjoyed as a reference was your brief history of the United States chapter, and it really is. Yeah, I mean, it really is encompassing, and it really. What I love, Bruce, is that there's references and texts and citations. Yes, but I mean, you are quoting primary sources in addition to folks like Jim Mars. So, tell us a little bit about, from a writing perspective, how was this an overwhelming process for you? Um, tell us a little bit about your writing process.
Thank you. It was all consuming. It was the greatest passionate endeavor of my life so far. And I got up early before regular work and then stayed up late working on it from 2014 until 2020. And it was an all-consuming passion. And my goal was to write and rewrite and improve and improve and improve what I was writing with a couple of images in mind. Originally, back when I went to bookstores a lot, people don't talk about going to bookstores that much. I used to love just discovering a book and picking it up. And when a book would grab me and I wouldn't be able to put it down, I would sometimes sit on the floor and read, half a book. And I wanted it to be that kind of thing. Velcro was my image. Wherever you might pick up my book in a bookstore, that wherever your eyes landed, I got you, so that each sentence wouldn't let you go, compelled you and pulled you on and on and on and on and on. That was a very intentional intention. And another image was like taking a comb at the top of a long head of hair, and I wanted it to be silky smooth going as you went through it. So those are the things I had in mind when I was writing it, James.
Yeah, that's very visual. And then COVID happens, which is totally part of the fabric of your book. So where are you in terms of when you're writing it? COVID happens, and tell us a little bit, because it is very important to the text.
Thank you. I at the beginning of 2020, I reached out to Chris Milligan at tryingday.com, introduced myself because I was a fan of his books, and he said, "I'll read your manuscript." And by maybe February or March, right when COVID was blossoming in our lives, he agreed to publish my book and said it can't come out for a year. And I said, well, when do you need the drop dead manuscript? Because I want to, I want to keep improving it. And it wasn't until early 2021. So for all of 2020, the first year of COVID, I was able to study that as much as I could, really in real time, almost full time, outside of having trying to make a living, and wrote a brand new chapter that got into the manuscript, COVID-19. And I feel very lucky about that, because um, I had COVID happen as I was conceiving the book. It easily could have been mentioned in the title as one of the four pillars or powerhouse topics that I wanted to expose what I saw as the truth of. God is real, school is really real, 9/11 really happened, and JFK was assassinated. But those four concepts and chapters are the pillars of the things I wanted to look at, let's say, in a different way and present a different body of information. Much of it, I'm saying, the official stories of those things are lies, but the truths about them can set us free.
We'll talk about your work with Trine Day in a minute, but let's go back to JFK, because when did that seize you as something that you couldn't let go in your mind?
He was equally up there in the 2000s when I was doing all my deep dive throughout. Throughout my whole life, I had always read about the presidents and about him in particular and about his assassination. And then in 2013, ramping up for 2011,
Okay.
the 10th anniversary of 2013, the 50th anniversary of JFK's assassination, I wrote up my thoughts about him for the first time to go to that open mic 7 Wednesdays in a row and give 7 little talks about JFK. And at the end of 2013, having done that, it just morphed right into needing and wanting to see, all right, how much can I say about him and religion and 9/11? Can I develop it into something that could be a book? So that's what that meant to me. And then for those next 7 years, I was continually researching, watching everything I could, listening everything I could about all these things, plus current events, and cobbled together the manuscript by the time I submitted it.
Yeah. I think it's important to mention that it is common for a book to maybe have a year or so before it sees the light of day when it's sitting with the publisher. So some people may wonder, oh, that's a long time. What is uncommon though is that you're able to continue working at it. Sometimes it just sits there over the work is done.
Right.
So that's unique, that you're able to do that. Now you have a stage background. Is that
Yeah.
correct, Bruce?
Yes.
What are your thoughts of Oliver Stone's JFK?
Must watch, great movie. It's in the history, it's in the story of the history of the assassination. 1,000 years from now, one would say America was shocked by the assassination. And then in the 1970s, there were landmark events that brought a lot more truth out. And then in 1991, Stone's JFK movie brought a lot more truth out to a whole new generation. And it caused Congress to demand the release of all the documents that any agency might have. And we've been struggling to get all those documents since. But after that movie, because of that congressional act in the 1990s and through today, with the different tranches of info that have come out, we've learned tons more about the assassination. So Oliver Stone made a huge difference with that great movie. And one of the wonderful things about it is it's got everything in the kitchen sink. It's got so many stories that destroy the mainstream that you can research. Plus, his main character Garrison is overwhelmed by a lot of the speculation, which is one of the things you have to wade through when you start researching the assassination, because there is so much obfuscation and deliberate messing of being able to follow the trail to come to any kind of conclusions, which is why it becomes a frustrating but a very passionate labor of love to those who really want to understand what the heck happened.
One of the great things about that film is that it does a great job showing the Zapruder film. From your stage background, from your marketing background, what do you think of the Zapruder film as something beyond just something that captures 27 seconds of that event? What do you see it as a kind of almost like a stage play itself, right? It's a very strange, but it's one of the most important films that we have, narrative and nonfiction, right?
Absolutely. At the surface level, it's horrifying. At the surface level, it, it's traumatizing. Okay, and we could talk later about how intentional the traumas are from these perpetrators to just terrify us and make us be scared children again who do what we're told by big daddy authority figures. But again, when you do the research, we find that in the decades since, tons of people have come out and put together and connected the dots to show how there are multi-day symposiums analyzing the Zapruder film that make a great case that it has been so altered and manipulated that everything in it is suspect. Now, he did get shot in that short amount of time, but the deepest research on the film indicates that a couple of main things were blurred over, like the extent of his head wound. None of the witnesses describe a giant wound coming out of the front like you see in the Zapruder film. Okay. Many of the witnesses there conclusively indicate, I'll say prove, that the car came to almost a complete stop or a full stop. And you can see the occupants of the car jerk forward at one point as if that's how hard the brakes were hit. And yet the background of the grass keeps moving almost without slowing down. It does slow down a little at that jerking stop. So it cannot be trusted on face value. In my chapter on JFK, I spend about 2 or 3 pages meticulously describing all these things and more, culminating in a bullet count of how many shots might have been fired. It seems easily 12, 13, 14, but then with these other evidence and testimony, up to 16 or 17 or 18 shots, James.
When you suggest alteration, um, Have you talked to anybody who just simply doesn't believe that?
Oh, I'm sure I have. Yeah, but these are not people whose research I respect. Anyone who's done any research knows you can't assert anything about the JFK assassination with certainty. So if I sound like I'm being certain about anything, take that caveat.
I'm going to shift here. You mentioned in your book a very interesting event called Hurricane Aaron. Can you remind us what that was and why you wrote about it?
Absolutely. It was a hurricane that was approaching New York City up the Atlantic for 2 or 3 or 4 days before 9/11. And I believe it was on the morning of 9/11. If you're looking at the map, here's the path of the hurricane heading toward Manhattan at the end of Long Island. And on the morning of 9/11, it does, I think, a 90, is that 90 degrees? Yeah, that's 90 degrees. Boom, turning away back out over the ocean. Now, that doesn't look natural just to a layperson, but then I also have a couple of paragraphs in there discussing the weather manipulation that our military apparently had back in the 1960s, to the extent that these experts or whistleblowers were saying we could, start and stop hurricanes at will. So I raised two huge questions. Does that mean every hurricane that has made landfall and killed people in the United States has been allowed to happen? But the question as related to Hurricane Erin is, by 2001, did we have the capability to steer hurricanes? Because that is a jerky, severe 90-degree, it looks like a right-hand turn when you're looking at the map, to give us the clear skies for a date, Tuesday, September 11th, where lots of resources were already in place for such a big event.
I mentioned this because Bruce, are you familiar? There was a Michael Crichton novel that came out in 2004 about weather manipulation. He took a lot of flack for it because he got into the whole global, commonly referred to then as global warming, State of Fear by Michael Crichton, and he talks about weather manipulation. I was wondering, did you ever come across that novel at all?
No, I had
There's
not.
another Crichton novel called Rising Sun, which is a little more famous, and it was a movie with Wesley Snipes and Sean Connery that talks about image manipulation, where a security footage was altered to
Mm,
change the face of a perpetrator, after the fact. I mentioned those two things because, boy, maybe this isn't too far out there when you have one of our most popular novelists at the time
hmm
posing these ideas that seem to not carry any weight in the mainstream because it's such an inconvenience to the trajectory of a narrative that you talk about newscasters and anchors as actors in a way, that they're reading a script that there's no real trust there between who we're supposed to get our news from,
right,
right? So
right.
so so how do you sift through and get news these days?
I have subscribed to dozens of independent researchers, journalists, authors. My inbox email, I get emails that are chock full of many institutions that provide independent research. That's where I get it. Plus on Facebook, and then plus in some mainstream news things in diminishing amounts. I check in because I need to know what uh, uh, mainstream believers are talking about so I can, fit in, and also need to know what the cutting edge researchers and investigators and authors are publishing. To the point about images, James, we're years past where we can trust anything we see or hear digitally delivered, an audio or a video, or even, new batch of pictures from the Civil War. We cannot trust them. We just can't trust them with AI and computer generation capability. Never again for the rest of our lives will we ever be able to trust at face value, without confirming its heritage or lineage or legacy, any picture, video, we are ever shown, right? Isn't that your impression of the technology these days?
Absolutely. And it's funny how AI suddenly is everywhere when, this has been going on for, as we're talking about an 8 millimeter clip from 1963, Um,
Yeah, and this raises a good point to make is that I'm convinced from the research I've done that the people in the shadows, as they can be referred to, working or actually the oligarchs, to control what we think, have technology, James, that is decades, if not more, more, maybe a century in advance of anything that we can conceive of. And that's a bold claim, but you got to do the research to see what that stands on in conjunction with something like 25 to 30 trillion dollars acknowledged and admitted from the government and the Pentagon that, oops, we can't account for it. So, what kind of technology do they have now? And they will make us think, and this is some of the biggest fears: an alien invasion, a UFO invasion, the return of a Messiah. They might show the Arab world the return of Muhammad. They might show the Christian world, South American, the Catholic world, the return of Jesus. We can't believe anything, even if it's on the news, even if it's from a president at a lectern. We simply cannot believe it at face value.
Yeah, I just got to say, I think it was one of the ZR rifle, the mafia plots with CIA and taking out Castro. One of the geniuses who threw out an idea of having the Messiah return to Cuba for the Cuban people
Yeah.
to rise up against. uh, Bruce, did you catch the debate the other day?
Yes.
Um, your thoughts, your impressions on what you were watching, as not just so much the debate, but I want to say, because I know you have this background in dramatics and presentation and marketing. From all of where you're coming from, what are you seeing?
I'll tell you where I'm coming from and I'll tell you what I saw. I'm coming from an obsession with President John F. Kennedy. So that's my standard, the value against which I compare all other presidents and contenders. Okay. And they all have fallen short since 1963. What I saw the other night so dispirited me, bummed me out. By three-quarters of the way through, I turned it off. I'll probably find and watch the rest of it, but it's demeaning. I saw two monkeys throwing poop at each other, James, and it's gross, it's demeaning, it's a degradation to think these are our only options to be president of the United States compared to what we can and should be according to our ideals and according to the greatness of President John F. Kennedy. We would not tolerate presidents and candidates as we've had for the last 60 years had we not been so dumbed down and the history of Kennedy's example been so forgotten and untaught that it's tolerable to even consider these people for more than 5 seconds. I would think you would think you're watching a parody. It's the other night was as bad as a Saturday Night Live sketch. But you have to be my age or as well read as I am to know, if you're a young person who's never read a history book, then this is what presidential candidates look and sound like.
Yeah. Bruce, in the time we have left, I want to talk about how your amazing podcast that you do, Trying Day the Journey. Um, Tell me a little bit about that in the sense of, did you conceive that, or how did that start?
You're going to love learning this, James. That is Chris Milligan's idea. It is Chris Milligan's podcast. It's Trine Days, the Journey podcast, conversations with Chris Milligan. He told me he wanted to start a podcast in the spring, summer 2020, when I was brand new to him and I was just writing my book and he was going to publish my book. You have a good voice. And Oliver Stone said I should do a podcast. I said, I know how to edit audio and I can, so I was able to mount it and get it on on the internet. And I can't rave about it enough because in the last 4 years, he's interviewed about 160 of his authors. He's published about 200 books, books that challenge official history because it matters. And he has interviewed them. And James, as you know, each episode's about 30 minutes. And people can go to trinday.com, find the podcast, and just pick a title that intrigues you. Kennedy assassination, CIA mind control, CIA drugs, Franklin scandals, sexual abuse scandals going up to the people in power, Daniel Hopsicker, Barry and the Boys, Barry Seal, pilot for the CIA, died in a hail of bullets with President Bush's personal phone number in his wallet. That is it. That is the truths that'll set us free. That's a curriculum that if enough Americans knew, they would have the same revolution I had in the 2000s about, oh, okay, the curtain's pulled back. I see these scoundrels in the background, and I know that what's presented on the mainstream by government and media is a show. It's a distraction, and we have to work like heck, roll up our own sleeves to find what's really going on and who's really doing things.
I mean, what's it like sitting there? You have a front row seat with these voices, with these authors, with all, as you say, all sorts of topics. I mean,
Yeah.
what's that like for you?
It's been invaluable because Chris asked me to moderate them. So basically, I introduced like Ed McMahon on the old Tonight Show. You know, welcome to Chine Days: The Journey. Conversations with publisher Chris Milligan. With us is James Day, author of The Mad Bishops, about amazing this one guy Anglin who was this phony bishop and how he was involved with the unscrupulous characters in New Orleans surrounding the JFK assassination. Now here's Chris Milligan. And yeah, and then for 30 minutes, I get to listen to him interview you and many, many others, and then throw in a question or so at the end. And again, it's just been part of my insatiable appetite to know what's really, really going on. And I'll tell you this briefly, because it sounds appropriate to some of the questions you've asked me. I have an outrage about being conned and fooled. And I don't know if it's got to do, I just have to get on a horse and grab a spear and go charging because I can't stand being conned and fooled. And it's just disgusting to see the extent to which our government and the mainstream media has been co-opted over the decades. It kind of happened slow. They kind of boiled a frog, but now it's complete. I think we've already gone over the edge of the cliff, and that's how urgent and important it is for people to test what I'm saying and what you write about and to get convinced to the point where people do something they've never done before. Bring it up in conversation. Try to spread the word about the need to learn true history and what's really going on, because we are going nowhere good.
I want to briefly touch on this idea of being conned. Uh, I've been thinking about that a lot myself. I've been looking into the works of screenwriter, playwright David Mamet, who kind of launched his career on con stories and people being conned, and how some of our great movies are some of our most entertaining movies, like The Sting or Ocean's 11, are about cons. Um, I mean, you're serious when you talk about this idea of we are being conned. I think we should emphasize that, right? I mean, this is not some phrase that you're saying. I mean, this is something you
Yeah,
really believe.
wholeheartedly. Presidents swear an oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. And every one of them, more or less, and now I believe almost completely over the last few decades, don't do that, but they pretend to. So that's a con. And if in 2020 the election was given to Biden and he was declared a winner, even though an honest vote count would have shown otherwise, that's a con. But James, it's comprehensive. And because this is going to get posted on YouTube, right? We can't tell too much truth because you might get punished. And that's all we should say about it, because that's already risky. But what about free speech? So to think we are America, land of the free and home of the brave, and that our representatives work for us, I'm sorry, that's an illusion. That's a balloon in a bubble that needs to be popped, because again, unfortunately, they're not taking us to any place good.
Okay, one last thing then, going off that. And yet there are platforms that are allowed to exist, Trying Day being one of them. I mean, your work being one of them. You have your own show. So one might say, well, what are you talking about? Because look, you have free speech. You have this outlet and you have followers. So what's the problem? What would you say to that?
I would say look at where the money gets spent and what it's causing. Not only the federal budget, but the giant corporate money and what's it causing? What is the food causing in terms of health? What is our tax dollars and the defense budget? What is it causing? Is it causing peace or is it causing wars? So it's opposite land, as I mentioned in my book. The things that are supposed to work for us and do good things don't work for us and they do bad things. So, yes, now simultaneously, because there's a kaleidoscope of things happening out there. There's a tremendous lockdown, crackdown on free speech. And yet there are a lot of platforms and a lot of people who are still publishing and posting content. So there's a right foot, left foot, two steps forward, one step back, noose that's tightening. So they're slowly clamping down. The trends you see are in the West and Europe and Brazil, Venezuela, and here in the United States, truth tellers are getting punished. They are getting blacklisted. They are literally getting locked up in jail. And the race is on. And this is the perpetual battle of humankind. Those who want power or what power does to people put in positions of power eventually strangles the freedom and the happiness of the people that they are responsible for.